For the last 400 years, there has been a perpetual misconception and flat out lie surrounding the story of Pocahontas, even to go as far as making a made for children Disney cartoon, which was a despicable, revisionist history spin piece from the master spin doctors themselves, in order to indoctrinate young kids to believe that the story of these first colonists was one of love, when in fact it was a travesty, a heartbreaking tragedy of untold measure, a tale of murder, kidnap, rape, and barbarism unmatched in the animal kingdom. In fact, to call them animals would be a disrespect to animals. These British brutes are to this day unmatched in their manifestation and implementation of terror. Now, the girl you know as Pocahontas, her name at birth was in fact Matoaka, which means a flower between two streams, as she was born between the Matapone and Pamunkey rivers. Her mother's name was actually Pocahontas, and her father's name was Wahunsenka. Now, Matoaka, her mother, Pocahontas, died giving birth to her, so naturally her father was devastated, and she became his favorite daughter because she resembled her mother, so just like you'd have a nickname, you know what I mean? She found that name. Now, as you could imagine, a unique bond was formed because of the tragedy of the passing of his beloved wife. There was also the miracle of life, which was his newborn daughter, Matoaka. And that unique bond that was formed between them was also because, furthermore, she resembled her mother. So naturally was referred to as Pocahontas, like little Pocahontas, They could never imagine the role that she would come to play in the history of the Americas, not only as a symbol of hardship and affliction, the affliction of many men and women throughout the Americas, but later would serve as a propaganda piece as the authentic story was totally revised. And as we're dealing with the master deceptionist of revisionist history. That being said, she also is a testament to the strength and resilience of the women of the Americas and their struggle, as well as the male counterparts who have always held their women in high esteem and so too suffer hardships beyond measure, defending their land, way of life, women and children against these murderous, heartless psychopaths, from the British Isles. Matoaka, or Pocahontas, after the passing of her mother, was in most part raised by aunts and other family members, relative as was customary, learning the ways of a woman. And as you could imagine, her father, the chief, was still in grieving and truly heartbroken over the sudden death of his beloved wife, but had to continue to show strength of the role of any chief. Now, Matoaka, or Pocahontas, was about 9 to 10 years old when that savage John Smith arrived on shore, and he was just shy of 30, and that was in like 1607. Now, the fallacy that is and was the Disney film Pocahontas portrayed this as a tale of love, a story of love, when in fact they were never involved, much less in love or married. That was a bold-faced fucking lie. First of all, she would have never gone against her father. Secondly, as she was the chief's daughter, and she was held to a higher standard in the ways. Now, getting to it, the English colonists stayed in Jamestown, which was roughly like 13 miles away from Powhatan. So naturally, when exploring the surrounding areas, as tragic fate would have it, they would have came into contact. And needless to say, the English wasn't bringing peace and hugs, rather aggressiveness, as is apparent in history. You know, savage, barbarianistic nature. That's what they was bringing. Kill, stealing, and destroying for food and supplies taken without asking. No surprise there. So moving forward, it was one of the Powhatan warriors who captured John Smith, which just so happened to be the chief's younger brother. Uh, yeah, the chief's younger brother, Pocahontas' uncle. Now, remember, this is a time, in these times, you know, the Spanish were further down south, so most likely concocted by the British. Um, they concocted a so-called alliance that was formed as a buffer to Spanish actions. And we're all too familiar with the white man's treaties and how he never honors them. You know, he, like I said, he most likely proposed the alliance in the first place, as if his intentions was to look out for the Powhatan when his intentions couldn't be further from the truth. Now, and that's common knowledge. British pieces of shit. So now, somehow, some way, John Smith snaked his way in to gain some level of trust, unbeknownst to them having ulterior motives, and was ultimately given a position of werewants. I believe that's how it said. It was basically like a middleman, a position where they were only going to deal with him to communicate with his savage British brethren. You know, here's John Smith's punk ass right there. So on to the back of my previous point regarding the fallacy of the tale of Pocahontas put forth through revisionist history and by the Disney Corporation, um, saying that she was sneaking him food and saving his life. That was a fanciful lie concocted by John Smith later on in life. You know, after his account was already wrote, later on in life, John Smith, in an attempt to romanticize the horrific facts of the matter, fabricated and made it up. You know, and that's typical of cover-ups and propaganda by way of revisionist history. You know, her and her father were close and would never go against the grain, especially for that ugly caveman-looking fat fuck that we're looking at here, John Smith. Moreover, she was 10 years old, wasn't going to travel 13 miles on the solo tip, lifting heavy canoes, traveling over bodies of water through the cloak of night to bring that nigga a snack, all the way from Wirawokomoko. Get the fuck out of here. So now that I've established the actual settings and the background of the times and separated fact from fiction, let's dive into what really happened. So these savage Brits were not only murdering, pillaging, and plundering throughout the coastlands of Virginia, but were kidnapping kids, having their way with them, raping and ravaging them, and taking them captive. Even having the nerve to say Native women were throwing themselves at them, when the harsh and sad truth was that they were offering themselves as a sacrifice. So while they were in their perverse lust and hellish desire, they could save their children from having to endure such affliction. You know, after seeing their men betrayed, murdered, villages destroyed, not only by the gun, but by European disease as well. So they acted sacrificially to shield their young daughters from rape and ravage, and sons from the sword and the gun. But this bloodthirst and lust, you know, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fill their desires. They wanted the prize, the chief's daughter, Pocahontas. And ultimately they succeeded in kidnapping her and raping her, killing her young husband, Kokwum, and making the child an orphan. If I didn't already mention, she was married to Kokwum and had a child. It was customary back then, you know, for young couples, often around the time of the coming of age ceremony, you know, to be married, you know. So around the time, so she was ultimately kidnapped when she was around 15 or 16, and you know, living with her husband Kokwum, in the Potowac village, this devil by the name of Captain Samuel Argyle, sought after her, and his plan was to capture Pocahontas since she was the daughter of the thief, almost as a bargaining ransom tool to thwart attacks by the natives, because they would get their ass whooped. You know what I mean? They had to use devilish means to you know what I mean, even defeat him. You know what I'm saying? Don't forget these were true warriors. So when they finally found out about her location, um, Chief Josapha or Japasa, um, you know, he suffered violence and violence against the village, and so you got to understand at this time, they were in a shitty position. You know what I mean? So yeah, she got kidnapped and whatnot. You know what I mean? By the gun and got taken into captivity. And then and she never knew that here they killed her husband. You know, I don't know if ultimately she knew, but at the time at least, they murdered her young husband. And it was tough because of course they wanted to retaliate. Come on, of course, but this is the chief's daughter, you know. So you gotta think about it like this. Um, he didn't want her to get killed when they went to retaliate against these devils. You know what I mean? He had hope that she would stay alive. Of course he didn't want her to live that type of life in captivity. But as I'm sure anybody would, they wouldn't want to risk their daughter dying because these motherfuckers were sick. They kill her just because. Um, so yeah, so it kind of just went about like that. And not only was she took captive, but she was raped. I mean, by who knows how many of these savage fucking Brits. You know what I mean? And just imagine this is a 15, 16-year-old girl we're talking about. And so basically, so she was suffering in her captivity, and there's accounts of they were saying things like, "Oh, your father doesn't love you, your husband doesn't love you." They were putting pure psychological hell on her, trying to break her spirit, as they do, you know. And all the meantime, she's getting raped. She's getting um, having her life ripped apart, her spirit decimated, you know. And this is clear through Matapone's sacred oral history, you know. And so to fast forward, not to not to get ahead, the dude who so-called married her, if you want to call kidnapping, uh, raping, and taking into captivity a marriage, was this piece of shit uh, Englishman John Rolfe, you know, and ultimately they took her back to England along with other captives, paraded her around in the streets, showing their prize, you know, showing their prize, parading her through the streets in England. And not only this was also strategic because they were after the recipe and the curing techniques of tobacco, so they can exploit it, so they can capitalize on it. They wanted the juice, they wanted the formula. So to think that these people try to say, oh, they married for love, this is some sick shit, man. some real sick shit. And she had to have a baby with this man. You know what I mean? Not by her own choice. Um, but you know what I mean? She had a baby with this man. His name was Thomas. So eventually they got what they wanted as far as the techniques of tobacco, and as you can see today, they obviously profited from it, and it's only legal for the white man to do it, right? So she was a pawn to save their peace, to save their savage asses, so that they wouldn't be killed themselves. They used her as a ransom, you know. Then of course, eventually they took her back to England. Ultimately, she was murdered. She was she was poisoned. She had health, vigor, and this is why they lusted for these women. You know what I mean? And then ultimately they killed her. They poisoned her. She died at the age of 21. That's horrible. Shortly after, like about a year later, the chief, her father, he died from grief. Imagine his heartache. It, so this is the true story of Pocahontas. Now I'm gonna tie in how this is all relevant to the so-called Prince Harry marrying this woman of color. I can guarantee you that I love. There's a sick and twisted aspect to this. I had to bring out the story of Pocahontas so that you understand the narrative. All right, so that you can understand the psychology of this all. Man, let's move on, man. Roll them up.
Notice, if you will, the half-caste child, and there are ever increasing numbers of them. Now, what is to happen to them? Are we to allow the creation of an unwanted third race? Should the coloreds be encouraged to go back to the black? Or should they be advanced to white status and be absorbed in the white population? Now, time and again, I am asked by some white man, if I marry this colored person, will our children be black? And as chief protector of Aborigines, it is my responsibility to accept or reject those marriages. Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see, in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black color. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out.
Perhaps the time has come to reinstitute an old custom. Grant them prima nocte. First night, when any common girl inhabiting their lands is married, our nobles shall have sexual rights to her on the night of her wedding. If we can't get them out, we'll breed them out. If we can't get them out, we'll breed them out. If we can't get them out, we'll breed them out. If we can't get them out,